When Jada and Janelle Rivers transferred to Rosewood Hills Academy, a private school filled with wealth, prestige, and mostly white students, they knew things wouldn't be easy. But they had no idea just how bad it would get. From the moment they stepped past the iron gates, they weren't treated like new students. They were treated like targets. And Ryan Mallory, the school's golden boy, made sure of it. With his crew of bullies always just a few steps behind, Ryan made it his personal mission to try and break them. The twins were shoved in hallways, laughed at during class, called names too ugly to repeat. But what Ryan and his friends didn't know was that Jada and Janelle weren't ordinary girls. Their father had raised them with strength, trained them in martial arts since they were young, and taught them one thing that mattered above all: never bow to hate. What the bullies thought were easy targets were actually black belts, and they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Before we go further, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The sun poured down over Rosewood Hills Academy, lighting up the brick walls and spotless sidewalks like a spotlight on a stage. Everything about the school whispered wealth, from the rows of perfectly trimmed bushes to the gold-embossed signs on every door. To most, it was just another school day. But to Jada and Janelle, it felt like walking into enemy territory. They walked side by side, uniforms crisp, heads held high. But they could already feel it. The stares, the whispers, not out of curiosity, but judgment. The kind that doesn't ask questions. It just assumes answers. They weren't just the new kids. They were the only black girls in a sea of sameness. Their father, Derek Rivers, had warned them. He'd told them the world wouldn't always be fair, that some rooms would go quiet the moment they walked in, and some people would try to test them just because of how they looked. So he prepared them, not just with speeches or advice, but with discipline, strength, and focus. He made sure they could speak with confidence and defend themselves when silence wasn't enough. Still, even with all that preparation, stepping onto that campus felt like walking into a storm they'd seen coming for years, but could no longer avoid. "Look at that," a voice said. Loud, cocky, and meant to be heard. The boy stood near the front steps with his arms crossed and that smug smirk that always followed trouble. "Twins?" another boy said with a sneer. "Didn't know they came in matching sets." Jada kept walking. Her fingers tightened for just a second before she let the breath out through her nose. She felt the heat of anger rise, but her father had taught her how to cool it just as fast. This wasn't new, but that didn't mean she was going to let it slide forever. Their father's words echoed in Jada's mind, calm, steady, and firm. "They want a reaction, don't give it to them." Janelle's fingers tightened around her backpack strap, her knuckles pale against the black fabric. But just like her sister, she kept her face calm, unreadable. They didn't need to speak. They never did. The fire that burned inside one was always matched by the other. They moved as one, quiet, steady, strong. And as they stepped deeper into the courtyard, the message around them grew louder without anyone saying a word. "You don't belong here." The sparkling floors, the tall windows, the shiny trophy cases, and the banners shouting the school's pride. From the walls, it all felt like a show, a story written for someone else, a place built to celebrate everyone, except them. But the twins didn't slow down, didn't shrink, didn't stop. "Ignore them," Janelle said under her breath, her voice low but solid, less advice, more reminder. "I see them," Jada replied softly, her voice calm on the surface but razor-sharp underneath. "But I'm not giving them what they want." The doors to the main building swung open with a smooth, mechanical hiss. Cool air rushed over their skin, but it couldn't touch the fire building inside them. As they walked through the hallway, it was like the whole school paused. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Eyes followed. Some looked curious. Others looked annoyed. But a few wore smirks, like they were waiting for the twins to mess up, to crack, to confirm the silent assumptions they'd already made. Jada scanned the hallway like it was a battlefield. Clusters of boys near the lockers, puffed up with fake confidence. Girls whispering behind manicured hands, giving those sideways glances full of quiet cruelty. Every look, every whisper, every sneer. It all landed like a challenge, and they didn't miss a single one. They knew this was just the beginning. The jabs would come in quiet forms. Snide remarks, careless jokes, words said just loud enough to sting but soft enough to deny. But they were ready. They had trained for storms just like this one. The sky over Rosewood Hills looked clear, but Jada and Janelle could feel it. That pressure in the air, the promise of a storm on the way. They weren't going to start the fight. Their father had raised them better than that, but if it came to them, they wouldn't back down. The first few days passed just as they expected, and even though they were ready, that didn't make it any easier to carry. From the moment they walked into their first class, they felt the room tilt against them, not with open hostility, but with something quieter, colder, judgment. The classroom was spotless, bright. Sunlight poured in through the windows and danced across the clean desks, but no amount of sunshine could hide the way people looked at them, or the way they didn't. Teachers called their names without looking up. Jada Rivers, Janelle Rivers. Flat, disinterested, like they were just check marks on a page, already forgotten the second they were spoken. No questions, no welcome, just cold efficiency. They were in the room, but no one really saw them, and that, more than anything, is what made this place feel heavy. But the Rivers twins? They weren't here to be seen. They were here to be remembered. In the hallways, the crowd always seemed to move just enough to block their path. A shoulder here, a slow step there. It looked like nothing to an outsider, but Jada and Janelle knew better. These weren't accidents, they were quiet reminders from the other students that they weren't welcome. But the twins didn't flinch. They didn't sigh or roll their eyes or even pause to react. They just kept walking, heads high, steps steady, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing them break. That was when Ryan Mallory decided to show up. He was hard to miss, that arrogant walk, that smirk like he owned the entire school. His blonde hair always perfectly in place, his uniform rumpled on purpose to show how little he cared. He didn't follow the rules, he bent them, and everyone else let him. Hey, he called across the courtyard one morning, just as the twins were heading to their lockers. His voice sliced through the air like a knife, loud enough to turn heads. His crew was already snickering behind him, eager to laugh at whatever came. Next, you two get lost on the way to the servants' entrance, Ryan said, grinning like he'd just delivered a punchline no one asked for. Laughter broke out, not because the joke was funny, but because the target was clear. Janelle kept walking. Her face gave nothing away. Her spine was straight, her grip on her books firm. Jada gave Ryan one quick look. That look was calm, cold, controlled. Then she turned her gaze forward again, never slowing down. But Ryan wasn't done. Guess they don't understand English, he called louder. Maybe we should try their language. What is it, jungle talk? This time the laughter was louder, meaner. Students who hadn't been paying attention now leaned in. Some laughed. Some just watched. But no one said a word to stop it. Jada's jaw clenched. She felt that slow, simmering heat rising in her chest, but she didn't let it take control. She focused on her breathing, focused on the feeling of Janelle beside her, that silent bond that had always been stronger than words. It held her steady, reminded her who she was, and so they kept walking. But it didn't stop. In the days that followed, Ryan's friends, Zach and Brent, picked up where he left off. They turned their bullying into a sport, bumping into the girls in the hallway, knocking books from their arms, flashing smug grins and muttering fake apologies that fooled no one. Didn't know they were letting janitors take classes now? Zach sneered one afternoon, brushing past with a smirk. Brent leaned in right after, whispering, "Maybe they're just here to practice. Gotta keep the floors clean, right?" The insults came with laughter, with eye rolls from nearby students, with silence from the teachers who always seemed to look the other way. Jada and Janelle didn't react. They bent down, picked up their books, held their heads high and walked on. But each time, it got heavier. The silence, the cruelty, the weight of it all pressing down little by little, daring them to break. But what the others didn't know was this. These girls had been taught how to hold their ground, and one day soon, that ground would start to shake. What hurt the most wasn't the insults. It was the silence. No teacher stepped in, no student spoke up. Even the ones who didn't laugh just turned their heads and pretended they didn't see. The adults in the room, those who should have protected them, kept their eyes glued to their papers or screens. No one wanted to admit that something this ugly could happen at their perfect little school. At home, their father noticed everything. Derek Rivers had taught his daughters how to defend themselves, not just with fists, but with discipline, focus, and self-control. But more than anything, he had taught them how to read the warning signs. And now he saw it in their faces, the weight behind their smiles, the edge in their silence. Over dinner, he didn't press them. He didn't force the truth out of them. He waited, watched, and listened. And when they finally opened up, he didn't interrupt. "You remember what I taught you," Derek said quietly. His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes were firm. Control is power. They want to get under your skin. Don't let them. Jada gave a small nod, her lips pressed into a firm line. Janelle sat beside her, equally strong, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Frustration, the kind that grows when someone pokes and pokes, waiting for a reaction. "They're pushing," Jada said, her voice low. "Harder every day," Janelle added. "They will," Derek answered without hesitation. "They think you'll break. They want to see it." "And if they don't stop?" Janelle asked. Her voice didn't waver, but her meaning was crystal clear. Derek met their gaze with quiet certainty. "Then they'll find out you're not the ones who break." Those words stayed with them. They didn't wear it like armor, but they carried it like a truth, a promise, one they would hold close in the days ahead. Back at Rosewood Hills, things only grew colder. The smiles got faker, the stares got longer. The silence in the halls, heavier. It was like the walls were closing in just a little more each day, trying to squeeze out anyone who didn't fit the mold. And every hour felt like another test. How much could they take? How long could they hold their ground? They walked through it all, head high, back straight. Not because it didn't hurt, but because they refused to be made small. They'd endured the whispers, the looks, the casual cruelty that passed for jokes in that school. And still, they stood tall. But the storm was building, and they could feel it. Ryan Mallory was the kind of boy who needed an audience. Words and shoulder checks were no longer enough. He wanted something bigger, something that would break them in front of everyone. Because deep down, he wasn't just a bully. He was an entertainer, and cruelty was his show. He didn't need a complicated plan. Hate never does. It began the moment Jada and Janelle stepped into school that morning. Their lockers were no longer just lockers. They had been turned into targets, covered in thick red paint. Words too vile to repeat, slurs, meant to cut deep, left for the whole hallway to see. Ugly drawings were scrawled across the metal doors. Twisted, exaggerated faces meant to mock, the kind of images meant to make people laugh at someone else's pain. Stuffed through the locker vents were crumpled papers, each one filled with more insults, each more disgusting than the last. Ryan didn't need to be nearby. He didn't need to claim it. Everyone already knew who did it, and everyone else. Still silent, it was like a contest to see who could be the cruelest. Every insult scrawled across the lockers felt louder than the last. Big, bold, and dripping in red paint. As Jada and Janelle stood frozen, back straight and faces held tight with control, the hallway exploded with laughter. Not the kind that fades quickly. This laughter was loud, sharp, and meant to hurt. Some students pointed and giggled, while others held up their phones, snapping photos like it was a joke worth sharing. A few tried to cover their mouths, pretending to be shocked, but deep down they were entertained. The twins saw it all. Every snark, every snap, every cruel whisper, pretending to be a joke, and each one hit like a sting under the skin. Ryan stood nearby, leaning against a locker with his arms crossed like he was proud of what he'd done. His grin stretched from ear to ear, eyes glowing with the thrill of attention. Zach and Brent flanked him, wearing the same smug expression. This wasn't bullying, it was a show, and the whole school was the audience. "Figured we'd give you some decorations," Ryan shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice was soaked in, mock kindness. "Thought it might help you feel more at home." Laughter rolled through the crowd again, crashing down like a wave, cruel and relentless. And in the background, a few teachers passed by. They looked, just for a second. Then they looked away, pretending they hadn't seen anything. Pretending it wasn't their job to care. Janelle's hands curled into tight fists at her sides. Her nails bit into her palms as she fought to steady her breath. Her chest ached from holding in the fire building inside her. Beside her, she could feel Jada's rage, too, simmering just under the surface, silent but scorching. They had taken slurs. They had taken the shoves. But this was different. This was a public attack, calculated and loud, a performance meant to strip them of every ounce of dignity, to humiliate them in front of everyone. Their father's voice echoed, in their minds like a drumbeat. Control is power. Don't give them what they want. But as Ryan stepped forward and began to clap, slow, mocking, and arrogant, the line between calm and fury started to tremble. "You should say thank you," he said, standing just a little too close now. His voice dropped low, each word sharp like glass. "Takes a lot of work to make you two feel like you belong." The crowd fell silent, waiting for a reaction, watching their faces for the smallest crack. But Jada didn't blink. She locked eyes with Ryan, her stare hard and steady. She didn't say a word, but the message behind her silence was clear. "You haven't broken me." Janelle stood just as tall, her breathing even but shallow. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The pressure was real, but she wouldn't give in either. Not here, not now. Still, they both knew something had shifted. This wasn't just another insult. This wasn't something they could ignore or brush off. This was a line crossed, a challenge, a moment that demanded a response, not just with words, but with action. Later, they scrubbed the paint from their lockers using paper towels handed to them by the janitor, who didn't say a word, didn't meet their eyes. The silence between them hung heavy. And then Jada spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of everything they'd endured. No more. That was all she said. But it was enough. Janelle didn't need to ask what she meant. She felt the exact same thing, burning, solid, and unshakable. She nodded once, sharp, certain. "No more," she echoed. Because now the storm wouldn't be weathered. It would be answered. This wasn't just about anger. It wasn't about snapping in the heat of the moment. Their decision came from something much deeper. An understanding that sometimes surviving isn't enough. Because if you keep taking hits and walking away, at some point, you stop being whole. You lose pieces of yourself that you might never get back. Jada and Janelle had reached that point. They knew the next time Ryan and his crew came for them, they wouldn't step aside. They'd stand their ground, and they'd fight not with rage but with every ounce of discipline their father had taught them. Since the locker prank, the air at Rosewood Hills had only grown heavier. Not a single word had been said aloud. But the tension followed them everywhere, thick, unspoken, and sharp. Students still gathered in their usual spots, but voices dropped when the twins passed. Eyes lingered a little longer. Whispers stirred like smoke in the background. Everyone knew something was coming. Jada and Janelle walked the same path they always did, side by side. Heads high, eyes forward, but they felt it. Every stare, every held breath. Just around the corner, they knew what was waiting, and there he was, Ryan Mallory, leaning against the sunlit wall like he didn't have a care in the world. But that look in his eyes, that mix of boredom and malice gave him away. This wasn't random. He had planned this. He believed this moment belonged to him. Zach and Brent flanked him like shadows, relaxed in their stance, but their gazes were alert, waiting for the cue. "There they are," Ryan said, loud and casual, like he was announcing the weather. His voice cut through the courtyard, turning heads, pulling a slow, silent crowd to gather around. Thought maybe you two finally took the hint and stayed home. Jada's eyes met his instantly, sharp, steady, unreadable. She didn't stop walking, didn't blink, but her stare landed like a punch. "If that's what you were hoping," she said coolly, "then you're even more pathetic than I thought." A low ripple moved through the crowd. Surprise. Interest. The energy shifted, Ryan's smirk twitched. His confidence wavered just for a second. Then he stepped forward, trying to reclaim control. "You've got a lot of nerve," he said, squaring up to her. "Talking like that, acting like you belong here." But this time, it wasn't just Jada who answered. Janelle stepped in, shoulders squared, voice calm but steady with all the pain they'd swallowed. "We do belong here," she said. "More than you ever will." Her words didn't shake. They landed with purpose. "You walk around acting like you own this place. But deep down, you know the truth. Without your crew and your cheap little jokes, you're nothing but a coward." Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be, because every student in that circle heard the weight of what she said. And for the first time, Ryan didn't know what to say back. The crowd had fallen quiet, not silent, just tense, watching. Students glanced at one another, sensing the moment shift. The air felt thick, like a storm was about to break. The ground beneath this confrontation wasn't just holding tension, it was cracking under it. Ryan stepped in closer. Too close. His glare locked on Jada's, but beneath all that fake confidence she saw it. Just a flicker of doubt in his eyes before he masked it with anger. "Say that again," he growled, his voice brittle, like glass about to shatter. Jada didn't blink. "You heard her the first time," she said evenly. "You just can't handle the truth when someone finally says it to your face." Ryan's chest rose, fast and tight, like he was holding his breath behind all that bravado. But the cracks were showing. He looked to the crowd, desperate for backup, for laughter, for something to hold on to. "You think you're tough?" he snapped. "Think you can just stand here, run your mouths, and not pay for it?" "We don't think," Janelle answered, her tone cutting like a blade. "We know." And that was it. The last push. Ryan didn't respond with words this time. His hand lunged out without warning, slamming into Jada's shoulder hard enough to push her back. But she caught herself, feet grounded like roots in the earth. She didn't fall. She didn't even stumble. A loud gasp rippled through the hallway. The moment had shifted, from tension to threat. Brent stepped up, sneering, and knocked the books from Janelle's arms. Pages scattered everywhere like echoes of every humiliation they'd been forced to swallow. Then Zach shoved her, hard, and with a smirk dripping poison he spat, "What now, you gonna run to Daddy?" That was it. The line had been crossed, bold, blatant, and there was no going back. Jada turned, fire lighting her eyes. Her voice was calm, but the power behind it was undeniable. "No," she said, "we're done running." And just like that, everything changed. She stepped forward with practiced grace and slammed her palm into Ryan's chest. It wasn't wild. It was clean, sharp, controlled, and it sent him stumbling back, the breath knocked straight out of him. Beside her, Janelle moved with the same fierce control. She dropped low, swept Brent's legs from under him and brought him down hard. The laughter he'd carried moments ago? Gone. The courtyard exploded. Gasps, shouts. Students backed away to form a circle, stunned and wide-eyed. Ryan, breath ragged, tried to recover. But the grin was gone. Only frustration remained. He lunged at Jada, swinging wildly, but she moved like water, ducking under his arm, slipping behind his punch, and landing a tight, clean strike to his stomach. He folded instantly, the fight draining from his body. Brent scrambled, but Janelle was already there. She caught his shoulder and twisted him to the ground again, fluid, precise. Every movement was muscle memory, shaped by discipline and training. Zach charged at her like a wild animal, desperate. But Janelle was calm. She sidestepped cleanly, caught his arm, and used his own weight to throw him down beside Brent. Both of them tangled, both gasping. Ryan, still reeling, staggered forward one. Last time, Jada met him with a sharp uppercut under the chin. His head snapped back. He stumbled, barely staying upright. But the twins? They didn't pause. They didn't hesitate. Every move they made was backed by every lesson their father had ever taught. This wasn't chaos, this was justice, controlled, earned, and long overdue. Every block, every strike, every move. Jada and Janelle weren't there to impress anyone. They weren't there to prove themselves to the crowd. They were there because a line had been crossed, and they were done staying silent. The school courtyard had turned into a battleground, and it was clear to everyone watching that the twins were not victims. They were the reckoning. That same courtyard, quiet just an hour earlier, now buzzed with a raw energy. It was alive. The bricks beneath their shoes almost felt like they were shaking from the weight of it. The crowd of students widened, voices rising in gasps and disbelief as the sisters moved like a force finally unleashed. Every punch, every block, every step, they were in perfect sync. This wasn't wild rage, this was focus. This was skill shaped by years of discipline. Ryan stumbled backward, trying to hold his ground as Jada's quick hits pushed him further. His face, once smug and untouchable, now showed something new. Fear. His eyes darted, unsure. The sweat along his forehead wasn't just from the fight, it was from panic. His usual armor, his status, his crowd. None of that could protect him now. "You thought we'd just take it," Jada said calmly, dodging his swing and landing a sharp elbow into his ribs. Ryan let out a grunt, stumbling to the side. "You thought you could keep pushing us until we broke?" Her words landed like blows of their own. Ryan wasn't just being beaten in the fight, he was being hit by the truth, loud enough for everyone. Around to hear. Brent had gotten to his feet, rage burning in his eyes. He rushed toward Janelle with a growl, but she was ready. She ducked under his swing and hit him hard in the chest with her palm. Brent folded over and crashed to the ground, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "You picked the wrong fight," Janelle said firmly, stepping forward so he knew. She wasn't letting him back up easily. Then Zach, desperate and reckless, grabbed a broken piece of wood that had fallen from a bench. He gripped it with both hands and charged at Janelle like it was his last chance, but she saw him coming a mile away. Everything slowed in her mind. Her training kicked in. She stepped to the side smoothly, grabbed his wrist, twisted it until the wood dropped to the ground, and then, without missing a beat, spun and slammed her elbow into his jaw. Zach dropped to his knees, dazed and silent. "Cheap shots won't save you now," she said, her voice calm but strong. The crowd around them, once laughing and cheering, now stood frozen. Their faces had changed. This wasn't funny anymore. They weren't watching the twins get bullied. They were watching something bigger, something they didn't expect, something they would never forget. Still burning with embarrassment, Ryan made one last move. He charged at Jada again, swinging wildly, his fists full of panic and nothing else. But Jada was already moving, calm, focused, and one step ahead. She ducked under Ryan's wild swing, grabbed his wrist tight, and twisted it hard. In the same motion, she stepped in and drove her knee into his stomach with a force that knocked the air right out of him. Ryan collapsed, gasping, folding onto the ground, clutching his ribs as the pain hit him fast. "You've had every chance to walk away," Jada said, her voice clear and steady. She wasn't just speaking to Ryan, she was speaking to everyone, watching. Her words carried all the hurt, silence, and strength she and her sister had carried since day one. "But you kept coming." She let go of his wrist and he dropped fully to the pavement. His body curled in defeat, his face twisted in pain and disbelief. Janelle stepped up beside her sister. Her breathing was deep but calm, her eyes sharp, locked in. The two stood together side by side, just like they had when they first arrived at Rosewood Hills. But now, the ground beneath them felt different, like they had claimed it, not with words, but with truth and grit. The courtyard, which had been filled with noise and taunts, had gone completely quiet. A heavy silence took over, as everyone realized this wasn't some high school scuffle. This wasn't a fight for attention or drama. This was a breaking point, one that had been coming for a long time, a storm that had finally been let loose. "Maybe now you'll learn," Janelle said, her voice low but powerful, slicing through the thick air. "We're not the ones you push around." And when Brent, fueled by pride and shame, tried to rise one last time, Janelle didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, planted her foot firmly on his chest, and held him there. He let out a frustrated groan, stuck beneath the weight of his own ego and her strength. "Stay down," she told him. Not as a threat, as a fact. Solid, final, like gravity. Jada scanned the crowd. Her eyes met every stare that dared to hold hers. She didn't need to say anything else. The message was written all over her face. This ends here, right now. But even as they stood over the boys who had humiliated and harassed them for weeks, Jada and Janelle knew this wasn't truly over. They could feel it in the way the crowd shifted, uneasy. In the absence of any teachers rushing to the scene. In the whispers already starting to stir, retelling the moment with twisted words and shaded truths. They knew the fight came with a cost. That winning didn't mean peace. That speaking up always rattles the silence people work hard to protect. But still, they didn't regret it. Not for 1 second, because for the first time since walking through those gates, they had made it absolutely clear. They would not be silenced. They would not be small. And anyone who tried to drag them down would have to answer for it. The twins stood tall, steady breaths, steady eyes, watching as the boys writhed on the ground, no longer untouchable. The fight might have ended for now, but the real storm, the one that had always been there, had just started to roll in. And in the middle of it, Jada and Janelle stood like lightning, seen, heard, unshaken. Even as the bullies groaned on the pavement, clutching sore ribs and holding their pride like it had been shattered, the crowd that once laughed at their cruel jokes now stood still. The excitement was gone. In its place was silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like guilt shared between everyone who had watched and said nothing. No teacher had come while the fight happened. Not one adult had stepped in to stop what had played out in plain sight. But now, as if drawn by the weight of what had just occurred, they started arriving one by one. Their faces were tight with concern, maybe even shock, but not surprise. Because deep down, everyone knew something like this had been coming. They just didn't want to admit it. "Enough!" a sharp voice called out. Mr. Carpenter, the assistant principal, pushed through the circle of students. His eyes scanned the scene, bruised boys on the ground, and 2 girls standing tall, breathing steady, calm as ever. His face looked torn between anger and relief. Relief that he didn't get there earlier, that he didn't have to see it happen. "What's going on here?" he asked, though it didn't sound like a real question. It was more like something he had to say, because anyone looking at the scene could already tell what had happened. Before Jada or Janelle could say a word, Ryan spoke first. His voice was scratchy, pained, but still dripping with the same arrogance he always carried. They attacked us," he coughed, struggling to speak but determined to play the victim. "We didn't do anything. They just snapped." The crowd shifted. Some looked down at their shoes. Others stole glances at Ryan, like they were suddenly unsure whose side they were supposed to be on. The lie hung in the air, thick and ugly. Jada's jaw clenched, but she stayed calm. She remembered her father's words. "Control is power, speak only when it matters." She met Mr. Carpenter's eyes, voice low but steady. "They've been coming after us since day one. Today they crossed the line. We didn't start it. We only defended ourselves." For a split second, something changed in Mr. Carpenter's face. Maybe it was guilt, maybe shame, but it disappeared quickly behind a mask of formality. "We'll figure this out inside," he said. But there was no comfort in his tone, no sign of fairness. "Just routine. All of you, come with me." The twins didn't argue, they didn't speak. They shared one look, one that said everything, and followed quietly behind him. The rest of the students stayed behind, the crowd dissolving into uneasy silence. The courtyard, once buzzing with energy, now felt like a place where something important had ended, and something bigger had begun. Inside the office, the air felt colder. The walls were tighter. But none of that cooled the fire still burning in Jada and Janelle's hearts. They sat side by side in stiff plastic chairs, hands resting calmly on their knees, eyes locked straight ahead. Across the room, Ryan, Zach, and Brent talked loudly about their injuries, trying to sell a version of the story that made them look innocent. But it wasn't working. Not anymore. And then their father arrived. His walk was steady, his face calm. But behind his silence was something fierce, a quiet rage born of watching his daughters be tested time and again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need. So just his presence said everything, and everyone in that room felt it. Derek Rivers stepped into the office with the quiet confidence of someone who had weathered far bigger storms and wasn't afraid of this one. His eyes went first to his daughters, not just checking for injuries but for the fire in their spirit. And when their eyes met his, steady and strong, a flicker of pride passed between them, unspoken but deeply understood. He turned next to the headmaster, a man named Harrington, who looked more annoyed than concerned, as if being pulled away from his schedule was somehow more important than the well-being of the kids in front of him. "We'll be launching a full investigation," Harrington said, his tone cold and clipped. His hands rested neatly on the polished desk. "But until then, I'm afraid both of your daughters will be suspended while we review everything." When Derek spoke, his voice was calm, but it carried weight. "My daughters defended themselves. That much is obvious. But honestly, I didn't expect anything different from this school." Harrington stiffened at the quiet charge in Derek's words. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. Just gave a tight-lipped nod and said nothing more. Not long after, Ryan's parents walked in, and the entire room changed. Sandra Malalari swept in like she owned the building, heels clacking, eyes flashing with fake concern and real anger. Her husband Greg followed, tall and tense, his glare fixed directly on Derek and the girls. "This is outrageous," Sandra snapped before anyone else could say a word. "Our son was attacked, and you're telling me these girls, these violent girls, are just suspended? They should be expelled, arrested." Her voice rose with every word. Harrington tried to calm her with vague promises about taking more action, but it was clear. Sandra wasn't here to listen. She wanted revenge, not answers. Derek never flinched. His gaze stayed locked on her, quiet and unreadable. But his daughters could feel it, the tension building in his shoulders. Not wild, not explosive, controlled, like the strength he had, taught them to carry inside themselves. He let her rage burn out, let her words fall flat under their own weight. "This isn't over," Sandra hissed, turning the full force of her anger on Derek, eyes sharp, daring him to speak. "No," Derek replied, his voice low and steady. "It's not." His words didn't shout. They didn't threaten. But they filled the room with a promise. The twins stood up, their suspension papers handed to them like receipts for a crime they hadn't committed. Still, they held their heads high, their backs straight, their eyes unshaken. The fight in the courtyard might have ended, but they knew another one had just begun, and this next one wouldn't be fought with fists. As they walked out, their father between them, they understood one thing clearly. Whatever came next, they'd face it side by side. At home, everything was quiet. The soft sounds of cars in the distance, the wind brushing through the trees. It should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. It felt like the calm just before a storm returns. Like something unfinished was still waiting, just beyond the edge of the sky. Inside the house, the air felt heavier than usual. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't regret. It was the weight of knowing that what happened at school wasn't the end of it. They had expected it to follow them home. They knew the Mallorys wouldn't let it go. Derek sat at the kitchen table, calm but alert, his back straight. His eyes were fixed on the open window, looking out at the quiet street like he could already see what was coming before it even arrived. Across from him, Jada and Janelle sat quietly. They weren't scared. They were ready. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of unspoken strength, shaped by everything they had been through and everything they had stood up for that day. "You knew they'd show up," Jada said, her voice even. It wasn't a question. It was a truth they all shared without needing to explain. Derek gave a single small nod, still watching the street. His mind was already steps ahead. "People like them," he said, voice low and steady. "They don't know how to take a loss. They think they're supposed to win just because of who they are. And when they don't, they bring the fight to your door, thinking you won't be ready." Janelle glanced toward the window. Her hands rested on the table, fingers relaxed, but ready? Her thoughts lined up like her movements, sharp, focused, prepared. "They think we're done because we didn't swing first," she said. Her words were calm, but there was steel behind them. "But they've never understood what real strength looks like." Before Derek could respond, the sound of tires rolling onto gravel broke through the air like a warning. It was loud and clear. The car doors slammed a second later, sharp, angry thuds. Then came the hard footsteps. The beat of expensive shoes hitting pavement, full of rage and privilege, each step echoing closer to their door. "They're here," Jada said softly. The words weren't needed. They all knew. Derek stood from his chair in one smooth motion. The room filled with his quiet, steady presence. Not fear, not panic, just a deep calm that said, "I'm ready. Stay behind me," he told his daughters. Not because he didn't believe in their strength, but because he wanted them to see how to face what comes to your door. He wanted them to understand that strength isn't just about fists. It's about standing your ground when someone tries to shake it. Before the doorbell rang, before a single knock landed, Derek opened the door himself. He stepped onto the porch with the calm of a man who'd faced harder storms and didn't flinch when they returned. Sandra Mallory stood there, her face tight with fury, her makeup perfect, her sunglasses pushed up like some kind of crown. But nothing could cover the heat in her eyes or the pride behind her anger. Next to her was Greg Mallory, tall and stiff, fists clenched, his jaw tight. The veins in his neck pulsed with tension like a rope pulled too tight. "You really think you're getting away with this?" Sandra snapped. She didn't say hello, didn't bother with any pleasantries. She just stormed forward, her words fast and sharp, her heels clicking on the concrete like gunfire. "You put your hands on our son, and you think there won't be consequences?" Derek didn't move. His face didn't change. He looked at her without blinking, his gaze steady like stone. Her anger hit him like wind against a mountain, and just like a mountain, he didn't budge. "Your son put his hands on my daughters," Derek said, his voice low but steady, every word carrying the kind of weight that filled the space like thunder before a storm. "They defended themselves. That's the truth, whether you want to face it or not." "Don't you dare pretend you're the victim," Greg snapped back, his voice rough, barely holding itself together. He stepped forward like he wanted a fight, his fists tightening and loosening as if he was just waiting for an excuse. "Your girls are animals, just like you," Greg snarled, "and you've got the nerve to act like you're innocent." The words hit the air like something rotten. The silence that followed was colder than steel. But Derek didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He let the insult hang there, sour and exposed, letting it say more about Greg than Derek ever could. Then finally he answered, not with anger but with a voice clear and grounded. "You already decided who you think we are," Derek said. His voice didn't rise, but every syllable landed like stone. "But the truth doesn't change just because you don't like it. You raised a bully, and today, that bully learned what happens when you cross the wrong line." Sandra's face twisted even more, her mouth opening to spit another insult, but Greg beat her to it. He charged past her, too deep in his own rage to stop himself. "You think you can talk down to us in our own town?" Greg shouted. His face was red, eyes wide, and then his arm came flying, swinging a heavy, wild punch straight at Derek's head. But Derek was already moving. He turned his body with smooth control, lifted one hand and caught Greg's wrist midair. The punch never landed. It just stopped, completely locked in Derek's solid grip. Greg's eyes went wide, shocked by how fast and easy it had happened. Derek twisted his arm just enough to throw him off balance, then released him without effort. Greg stumbled sideways, trying to catch himself. "You've made your choice," Derek said, calm as ever. His eyes didn't soften. "Now you live with it." But Greg wasn't done. Still blind with pride, he rushed again, both hands out like he was going to tackle Derek, as if muscle alone could make up for all the control he lacked. Sandra screamed something, unintelligible and wild, as she tried to follow. Her nails scratched at Derek's arm in a blur of chaos and fury. Derek didn't even blink. He stepped back just slightly, just enough. Their own momentum worked against them. He caught Greg's arm again and spun him to the side, guiding his fall to the porch floor with a loud thud that made the wood shake. Sandra lunged, swinging her hand. Derek caught her wrist midair. With calm precision, he turned her around and pulled her arm behind her back. Not to hurt her, but to stop her, to hold the storm still with clean control. She gasped, breath sharp between her teeth. "You came to my home," Derek said, his voice quiet but full of power. "You thought you could bring fear here, but fear doesn't live in this house." And in that moment, the truth settled like a final note played in a silent room. Loud, without volume, undeniable and firm. The porch held still, like time had paused. The Mallorys were stuck, trapped in their own emotions, swinging between rage and fear. Derek stood firm, holding Sandra in place while Greg struggled on the porch floor, embarrassed more than bruised, crawling back to his feet. His face was flushed red, veins popping at his temples, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. He didn't know whether to keep fighting or walk away. Either choice cost him something. But his rage was too loud in his head to let him see he'd already lost. "You let me go," Sandra hissed. She twisted against Derek's hold, her voice high with panic. She tried to hide behind anger. But beneath the surface, her composure cracked. The pressure leaked through no matter how hard she tried to hold it in. "Do you know who we are?" she hissed. Derek's eyes didn't waver. Calm and cold, they held her in place, not with pain, but with a grip firm enough to show who had. "Control of this moment. I know exactly who you are," he said, voice low and level. His stare was razor sharp, shaped by years of facing conflict without ever needing to shout. "And I'm not impressed." Behind them, Greg stumbled back, to his feet, and came charging again. This time there was no thought behind it, only rage. His swing was wild and clumsy, the kind of move made by someone used to winning just by showing up loud. But Derek had seen this kind of man too many times. He didn't flinch. He sidestepped with practiced ease and used Greg's own momentum to hurl him straight into the porch railing. The wooden boards groaned under the weight. "You think this is over?" Greg barked, gasping for breath. His words came out rough, desperate, spit through clenched teeth like they were weapons. "You and your girls. All of you. You're finished." Derek stepped toward him, steady and certain, needing no anger to make his presence known. "No," he said simply. "You are." Greg threw one more punch, wild, ugly, and hopeless. Derek caught it clean. Twisting his arm, he spun him around and slammed him to the porch, flat on his back. The air left Greg's chest in a loud, broken gasp as he lay there, stunned and silent. Sandra screamed. This time it wasn't fury behind her voice. It was fear. Real fear. She clawed at Derek's arm, hands trembling as panic overtook her calm. But her motions were scattered, broken. She had nothing left. Derek let go of her wrist. Not because she'd overpowered him, but because he didn't need to hold her anymore. Her fight was gone. Her strength had slipped away, leaving her breathless and shaken. Just inside the doorway, the twins stood watching. They didn't flinch. Their faces were still, their eyes locked on the scene. This wasn't fear in their eyes. It was focus. They had seen these moves before in training, but now they watched their father live them. Every action a lesson come to life. "This is what they always do," Derek said, loud enough for both the Mallorys and his daughters to hear. His voice didn't rise, but it filled the space with power. "They think they can walk into our homes, into our lives, and break us. But they forget. We don't fold. We stand." Sandra's eyes darted from her husband, still groaning on the porch floor, back to Derek. She opened her mouth like she wanted to speak, to hurl one last threat, or excuse, or lie. but nothing came out. Her breath hitched. The rage in her chest faded, swallowed by the weight of what she'd just seen. "Call the police!" She finally screamed, her voice cracking as panic stole the edges of her words. "Call them. He attacked us." But even as she shouted, her words felt thin, empty echoes with no weight. And somewhere inside, even Sandra knew the truth. No one was going to believe her. "You came here," Derek said quietly. His voice never rose, but every word landed like a heavy stone dropped into still water, rippling out, impossible to ignore. "You brought this to my door, and now you'll have to deal with the storm you started." Greg, still on the porch floor, pushed himself up on one elbow. His eyes were wide, filled with disbelief. He wasn't just staring at Derek. He was seeing the truth he'd missed all along. Everything he had underestimated, everything he thought he could control. Now it stared back at him, strong and unshaken. Then came the sirens. Faint at first, but getting closer. Their high-pitched wail sliced through the air like a knife, sharp and final. From up and down the street, neighbors stepped out onto their lawns. Some were drawn by the noise. Others had seen everything. Their faces held a mix of curiosity and quiet satisfaction, like they had been waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to finally stand up to the Mallorys. Derek didn't flinch. He didn't move an inch as the sirens grew louder. He stood, tall with his daughters on either side of him. Jada and Janelle, both calm, both proud. They weren't afraid of what came next, because no matter what happened now, they had already won the battle that mattered most. This fight wasn't about bruises or fists. It wasn't just about standing up to bullies. It was about holding your ground when the world expects you to shrink. It was about proving to the school, the Mallorys, and the whole town that their strength, this family's strength, was unshakable. As the first police car turned into the driveway, lights flashing red and blue across the house, Derek's voice cut through the air one last time. "You came looking for a fight," he said, steady and strong. "Now you've found it." The flashing lights painted the front of the house in bursts of color, rolling across windows and walls like waves. It felt less like an ending and more like a storm changing shape, moving from fists and fury to the cold presence of badges and authority. Still, Derek didn't move. He stood in the doorway, his daughters right beside him, the three of them side by side like a wall holding the line against everything that had tried to break through. A symbol of strength that no amount of hate could shake. The officers stepped out slowly, reading the scene in silence. Their hands near their belts, their eyes scanning everything. The man standing tall, the two bodies on the porch, breathless and beaten, the crowd of neighbors watching quietly from their lawns. It wasn't hard to see who had brought the chaos. And it wasn't hard to see who had contained it. Then, Sandra Mallory's voice tore through the silence. "Officer, officer, arrest him!" She screamed, pointing wildly at Derek. Her heels clicked fast against the pavement as she rushed toward them, face red and twisted with rage. But beneath the anger, something else had started to show. Fear. The kind of fear that no longer knew how to hide. "He attacked us," she yelled, waving her arms. "We were defending ourselves, and he assaulted us in our own neighborhood." Her words tumbled out fast, crashing over each other. Accusation after accusation, louder and more frantic, like she was trying to drown out the truth with sheer volume. Her voice cracked as she spoke, growing breathless with every word. She was losing control. The officers didn't move right away. Their eyes shifted between Derek and the Mallorys, between calm and chaos. One officer looked toward the neighbors, then back at the man who had stood his ground without striking first. Jada and Janelle didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their calm was louder than any voice. Sandra kept yelling, but the power behind her words was gone. Everyone could feel it. The neighbors, the officers, even Greg, who now sat slumped against the porch railing, defeated and silent. This wasn't just a moment of justice. It was a turning point, and Derek, standing steady in his own doorway, had made sure of that. But the lead officer, a calm, steady man whose badge read clean, didn't jump to any conclusions. He didn't buy into panic or drama. Instead, He lifted one hand slowly, his voice level and firm, seasoned by years of dealing with messy situations that rarely had simple truths. "Ma'am," he said, eyes focused squarely on Sandra, "I need you to take a step back and breathe. We're going to figure out what happened, but I need to hear from everyone involved. I'll begin with the homeowner." Sandra opened her mouth, ready to explode again, but something in Officer Clean's eyes made her hesitate. She huffed out a breath and stepped back, planting herself beside Greg, who was still groaning on the porch floor, clutching his ribs like his pain could somehow make his side of the story seem more believable. Officer Clean turned to Derek next. His eyes were alert, cautious, but not accusing. His tone was even, respectful. "Sir, can you tell me what happened here?" Derek looked him straight in the eye, standing tall with his hands calm at his sides. His voice was clear and steady. "No." Yelling no dramatics. "They came to my home without warning," he said slowly, each word chosen with care. "They were upset about what happened at school between our children. They stepped onto my porch, shouted threats, and then," he nodded toward Greg, "he threw the first punch. I only defended myself and my family." Clean gave a slow nod, his expression unreadable. "And your daughters?" he asked, glancing briefly at Jada and Janelle, who stood quietly beside their father, strong, composed, and completely grounded. "They witnessed everything," Derek replied without hesitation. "They did not get involved. I told them to stay inside, and they listened." Another small nod from Officer Clean. His eyes scanned the porch, the tension in his brow showing he was already putting the pieces together. Then he turned toward Sandra and Greg, his notepad in hand. The moment had shifted. Sandra jumped in fast, her voice shaking with forced emotion. She launched into her side of the story like a woman clinging to a raft in rough water. Her words came quick, desperate, claiming they were innocent, that they had just come to talk, that they were attacked without reason. She painted herself and Greg as victims, her tone full of entitlement and practiced outrage. But as she talked, Clean's face didn't change. He didn't stop her. He didn't argue. But the longer she spoke, the more obvious it became. He wasn't buying it. When she finished, he let the silence stretch before asking, "And you're saying this was self-defense?" His voice was still calm, but now it carried weight, the kind that made people squirm. Sandra tried to hold her ground. "We just came to talk," she repeated, but her voice cracked at the edges. Her anger couldn't fully hide her fear now. "He attacked us." Clean's gaze sharpened, and then, with a calm, quiet authority, he turned his head toward the crowd of neighbors still gathered along the sidewalks, some holding their phones, others whispering to each other. "I'm going. Do need some witness statements," Cleany called out. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "Anyone who saw what happened, please step forward." For a second, no one moved. The moment hung still. Then, slowly, a man stepped out from the crowd across the street. He was older, weathered, and looked like someone who'd seen plenty in his lifetime. His voice was clear and unwavering. "I saw it all," he said. "They came out of that car yelling from the start. The man threw the first punch. The homeowner never laid a hand on anyone until he had no choice." Another neighbor followed, then another. One by one, voices from the community rose, not with shouting but with truth, calm, direct, and powerful. They didn't just defend Derek. They told the story exactly as it happened. Their voices formed a steady rhythm of facts that cut right through Sandra's performance, like sunlight burning through fog. And in that moment, for the first time since the shouting began, the weight of truth finally shifted into full view. Every neighbor told the same story, clear, honest, and steady. Everything Derek had said was backed up, word for word. Officer Clean listened closely, his pen moving across his notepad without pause. And when the last person finished speaking, he closed the pad with a soft snap, quiet, but somehow louder than the sirens that had faded minutes earlier. "We're going to finish this at the station," Cleany said, his voice steady and firm. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision. "But from what I've heard so far, we have more questions for you two." He looked straight at Sandra and Greg, and for the first time all night they didn't yell. Their faces looked pale and tight under the red and blue glow of police lights. Officers stepped forward to help Greg to his feet, slipping the cuffs on with firm hands. Sandra's voice rose again in protest, but this time it sounded smaller, thinner, like even she knew the story had changed. Her words faded, swallowed up by the weight of the truth finally landing. Derek didn't move. He stood tall as Sandra, and Greg were taken away, his daughters beside him, steady as ever. His eyes didn't follow the Mallorys. Instead, he looked out past them, toward something bigger, toward a future that was finally shifting. For the first time in a long time, justice didn't feel like a dream. It felt like it was finally arriving, one step at a time. There were still questions. The night wasn't over. But something had changed. The tide had turned, and this time, it was turning their way. The police station felt cold, as if the walls had soaked up years of pain and pressure. Stories had been twisted here. People had been silenced. But as Derek and his daughters sat quietly in the metal chairs of the waiting area, they weren't afraid. They didn't fidget or pace. They just sat, calm, steady, waiting. They had been through worse. Truth, like the ocean, doesn't rush. It rises slowly, with patience and purpose. And the Rivers family knew that all they had to do now was stay grounded, stay still, and let it rise. Officer Clean moved through the station with focus. Not fast, not frantic, just steady. He wasn't chasing noise. He was chasing truth. He took notes. He read witness statements. He reviewed doorbell footage from neighbors who had offered it willingly, wanting to see justice done right. Derek watched him work. Not with suspicion, but with quiet respect. He didn't see a man rushing to blame. He saw a man taking his time to get it right. Someone who understood that truth didn't always shout. It stood still. Jada and Janelle sat close to their father. Their backs straight, their hands still. On the outside, they looked calm. But inside, their minds raced. Every insult, every shove, every quiet moment they had swallowed at Rosewood Hills replayed like scenes in a movie. The weight felt endless, the walls too tight. But they didn't break, they never did. They had walked through fire together, and they were still standing. Finally, Officer Clean returned, his notepad tucked under his arm. His face looked tired, but focused. He stopped in front of them and cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Rivers," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've reviewed the witness accounts. I've gone over the camera footage, and it's clear you didn't start this. It's also clear your actions were defensive." Derek gave a quiet nod. Not proud, not relieved, just steady. The kind of nod that comes from a man who spent his whole life trusting the truth to speak for itself. Eventually, Officer Claney shifted slightly, glancing at the notes in his hand. "And there's more. The footage we collected clearly shows the Mallorys came to your home angry. They stepped onto your porch first, they were shouting. And they threw the first punch. We have it from multiple angles." A soft breath escaped from Jada and Janelle. Not a sigh, just a release. The kind that comes when the storm has passed and the house still stands. A flicker of warmth in their chests, like a candle that kept burning even in the wind. Claney continued, keeping his voice level. "That said, because of the injuries and the Mallorys' claims, we'll need full documentation, formal statements, a full report. There may still be legal steps ahead. But I want you to know." His eyes met Derek's, not with suspicion, but with something closer to quiet respect. "From what I've seen, the evidence supports your account." Derek didn't miss a beat. "You'll get every answer you need," he said, calm and sure. They followed Clean into the interview room. Jada and Janelle walked beside their father, the moment pressing deep into their bones. But it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a marker. A reminder of how far they'd come, and what they had survived to stand here. Inside, under the sterile light of the small room, they spoke. Clear, steady, every answer honest, every word rooted in truth. They told their story, from the first shove in the courtyard to the chaos on their front porch. There were no gaps, no hesitation, only facts shaped by lived experience and carried with dignity. They talked about the bullying, about the day their lockers were vandalized, about being pushed, mocked, laughed at over and over, and finally, they spoke of the moment when enough became enough. They didn't sound broken, they sounded strong, because they weren't telling a story to gain sympathy. They were telling it so no one could twist it again. And in that small room, piece by piece, the truth built itself like a bridge across the silence. The officers didn't interrupt. They didn't question the facts. They just listened. And with every passing moment, it became clearer. This wasn't just a reaction. It was a response to injustice. Later, in a quieter part of the station, Derek turned to his daughters. His voice was soft, but it carried a weight only earned through years of experience. "You see how it works," he said, not as a warning, but as a reminder. They'll try to rewrite it, make it their version. But the truth? It waits. It stands. Jada looked him in the eye. Her voice didn't shake. "We're not done yet." Janelle nodded, steady beside her. "But we're getting there." Officer Clean returned, notepad back in hand. His expression was thoughtful and maybe a little tired. But there was something solid in his voice. "There's one more thing," he said. "One of your neighbors mentioned some earlier problems at the school. We're going to pull camera footage from the school grounds. If there's a pattern, it'll help settle this faster." The words landed like a key sliding into a locked door. Derek and his daughters exchanged a look. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because up until now they had carried the weight of what happened at Rosewood Hills alone. And the school? The school had looked the other way, over and over, but not anymore. The door to the truth had been cracked open. And for the first time, someone else was finally looking inside. If the truth of those days at Rosewood Hills finally came to light, this wasn't just about clearing their names anymore. It was about shining a light on everything the school had tried to keep hidden for far too long. "Do it," Derek said without hesitation. "Let the full story come out." Officer Clean gave a single nod and stepped away to make the call. His movements were focused and firm, no doubt in his stride, no hesitation in his voice. He knew what had to be done now. As quiet returned to the station, Derek and his daughters sat side by side, calm and steady. They knew the storm wasn't over, not completely, but they could feel it. The tide had shifted. It was moving in their favor now, and whatever came next, they would be ready. The low hum of fluorescent lights buzzed through the station ceiling, a dull sound that usually faded into the background. But now, in this moment, it seemed to echo with purpose, like it was counting down the seconds until justice finally arrived. Derek sat between Jada and Janelle, their shoulders just close enough to feel the strength in one another. They didn't need to speak. Their silence was filled with a quiet understanding, built from everything they had endured and everything they had stood up against. Across the room, through the glass windows of the next office, they could see Sandra and Greg Mallory sitting at another table. But now that proud posture Sandra always wore was starting to crack. Her eyes jumped nervously between the officers, her lips pressed into a tight, trembling line as if she was trying to hold something back. Fear, guilt, or maybe both. Greg looked heavier in his seat, not from his injuries, but from everything catching up with him. His shoulders slumped. His eyes didn't rise. He couldn't bring himself to look at the window or at Derek. He just stared down at the floor like it might offer him a way out. Officer Clean came back in, this time holding a thick folder full of photos and reports. His face was sharper now, tight with the certainty that only hard evidence can bring. He pulled a chair up to the table, opened the folder, and placed the first photo under the harsh overhead light. It was a still frame from a neighbor's security. "Kimra?" Greg's face twisted with rage, his fist mid-swing as it flew toward Derek's head. Clean didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He laid the rest of the photos across the table, each one clearer than the last, each one a frame in the story they had lived through, proof of who had started the fight and who had tried to end it with dignity. There were no blurred lines, No gray areas left to argue, just the truth, captured in seconds and cemented in ink. Derek looked at the photos quietly. No smug reaction, no relief. Just a quiet breath, slow and steady. Because this wasn't news to him. It was simply confirmation. He had known all along that the truth was on their side. Now, finally, others could see it too. We also pulled footage from the school, Cleena said, flipping open a second stack of images. These weren't as sharp, grainy and dim from the hallway cameras, but they told the story just as clearly. The prank at the lockers, the boys blocking Jada and Janelle in the hallway, the shove that triggered the fight in the courtyard, and then came the statements. We've had several students come forward, Cleena added. A few of them admitted what happened, the bullying, the slurs, even the plan behind the prank. The room was still. Derek sat with his daughters on either side, hearing each word with the kind of strength that doesn't shout. It just stands. For so long, they had carried the weight of silence. The school had ignored them, their peers had laughed, and the system had turned a blind eye. But now, the silence was breaking, and the truth, slow, steady, and unstoppable, was finally beginning to speak. We're building a strong case in your favor, Officer Clean said. At those words, Jada and Janelle let out a breath, not one of relief exactly, but the kind you take after holding it in too long. It was steady, controlled, like they were finally starting to feel the weight of the fight shift just slightly off their shoulders. And the Mallorys? Derek asked. His voice was low but unwavering. Not emotional or urgent, just steady. The way a man speaks when he knows the truth is on his side. Cleene paused for half a second, his jaw tightening. When he spoke, his words were careful, but there was no doubt in his tone. They're in trouble, he said. Real trouble. He continued. They came in loud, sure their story would be enough, but the evidence doesn't back them up, and the more they talk, the deeper they dig their own hole. Through the glass window, Derek caught movement. Another officer had stepped into the room where Sandra and Greg were being questioned. The officer dropped a heavy stack of paperwork onto the table with a thud. It was the kind of sound that carried weight beyond. Just paper. Sandra's mouth moved quickly behind the glass, but they couldn't hear her. Still, her frantic gestures and wide eyes said enough. Panic had taken over. Greg, once full of rage, now sat still, silent, staring at the tabletop as if trying to will this all away. His hands were clasped tightly, knuckles white, like he thought, squeezing them hard enough might stop what was coming. Let them see everything, Derek said softly. Not to anyone in particular, just to the room. But Cleena heard him and gave a nod. We intend to, he replied. Then he closed the case, folder with a quiet but final snap. It felt like sealing something inside, a chapter coming to a close or maybe the beginning of the end for the Mallorys. Another officer walked in. He was younger, new to the job by the look of his crisp uniform, but his eyes already knew how. Heavy some moments could be. He handed Clean a transcript. Statements from 2 students, the officer explained. They back up the harassment reports from the school. Lines up with what Mr. Rivers and his daughters shared. Clean read through the pages quickly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned each line. When he finished, he set them down gently, but the air around them shifted with finality. That should do it, he said. We're moving forward. Assault, trespassing, maybe even harassment depending on what else we pull from the school. Derek didn't react. He didn't nod or smile. He just stayed calm, centered, like a man who knew this wasn't about revenge but about standing tall for something that mattered. Beside him, Jada and Janelle noticed the small shift in their father's shoulders. Not pride, not triumph, just quiet certainty. He had carried this weight not for himself but for them. For the truth. Behind the glass, Sandra's voice rose again. It had none of the polish it once had. Now it sounded desperate, unsteady. Greg sank deeper into his seat, his head low. The fight in him had faded. All that bluster had fallen away. Clean turned back to them. His voice was softer now and real. "You've handled this better than most," he said. "It's not over. This won't be easy. But you made the right call." Derek nodded once. Not in thanks, but in understanding. He hadn't walked through this for praise or validation. He did it because it was the right thing to do. Because when you're raising daughters in a world like this, sometimes showing up and standing firm is the only way to make sure the world doesn't forget who they are or what they deserve. As the officers moved to process the Mallorys, leading them out of the interview room with calm but firm steps, the Rivers family stayed seated. Their eyes were steady, their hearts in sync, united by something stronger than words: truth. The tide hadn't just turned. It had started to wash away every lie, every cover-up, leaving nothing but the truth standing. The fight wasn't completely over yet, but they could see the finish line ahead. Clear, steady, and sure as the morning sun. And when that moment arrived, they'd face it together, just like they always had. The station felt still, almost as if the building itself was holding its breath. Everything that had been hidden, every truth ignored or twisted, now hung heavy in the air, too real to deny, too solid to be reshaped by people who once believed they could get away with anything. Derek sat between his daughters, unmoving, his gaze calm and locked on the officers as they did their work. There was no more hesitation in their steps, no doubt. Everything they did now was deliberate, built on the kind of truth you couldn't bend. Each piece of evidence had laid the foundation for a wall that now boxed the Mallorys in. Across the room, beyond the thin pane of glass that separated the holding area from the main floor, Sandra paced like a wild animal trapped in a cage. Her fists clenched and unclenched. Her eyes darted everywhere, searching for an opening, a loose thread, something she could twist into her version of the truth. But nothing was left. Every lie she had spun had already tied itself into knots too tight to undo. Greg, who once shouted and threatened without fear, now sat hunched over. His elbows dug into his knees, his head bowed so low it almost touched the floor. He didn't look up. His eyes were fixed downward, as if the answers might rise from the tile if he stared long enough. But there was nothing to find, just the cold reflection of every mistake he had made. At the center of it all stood Officer Clean, his shoulders squared, his face unreadable but focused. He flipped through the final reports, statements, video stills, written testimonies, all of it gathered over the past few hours. Neighbors had spoken clearly. Their stories matched. The security camera footage told the same tale from every angle. And the students at school had filled in the rest. Clean turned toward Derek. His voice was steady, no hesitation in his words. "We've finished our review," he said. "You and your daughters are cleared of all charges. Everything we've seen backs up your account. There's no doubt." Jada and Janelle shared a quiet glance, not in shock. They had always believed the truth would win, but in quiet understanding. It was the kind of moment that didn't call for cheers. It lived deeper than that, a quiet peace planted firmly in their hearts. Derek gave a slight nod. He remained composed, but there was a subtle shift in his shoulders, like a weight had lifted, even if just a little. This wasn't just about being right. It had always been about protecting his daughters, standing for what was right when no one else would. And the Mallorys? Derek asked. He didn't need to hear the answer, not really. But some truths need to be spoken out loud. Clean's expression hardened. "They'll be charged," he said. "Assault, harassment, trespassing, obstruction, everything they did at the school and here at your home. It's all been documented. This time they won't be able to talk their way out of it." As if to mark the moment, another officer walked into the holding area. He slid a key into the lock, turned it with a sharp click and opened the door. He motioned for Sandra and Greg to stand. There was no more yelling, no last-minute excuses. Just silence. Heavy, hollow silence. And this time, that silence belonged to the Mallorys. Sandra's protests rang out sharp and shaky, rising in panic, but they didn't land. The officers stayed calm, unmoved by her cries. Her voice cracked under the weight of the moment. "You have no right," she shouted. But the officer beside her didn't flinch. He just kept guiding her forward, steady and firm, carrying out his duty with quiet resolve. Greg didn't fight. He was worn down, his anger drained. He stood slowly as the cuffs locked around his wrists. He looked at Derek, but only for a second. Then dropped his gaze. He couldn't hold the eyes of the man he had tried to intimidate, the man he now knew he had completely underestimated. The twins stood still, watching it all unfold. They didn't gloat, they didn't smirk. What filled them wasn't pride, but a deep, calm satisfaction. They had faced hate and didn't break. They had stared down fear and answered with courage. When things got hard, they leaned into what their father had taught them. Years of training, discipline, and love had built this strength in them, not just in their fists, but in their hearts. As the Mallorys were walked out, something final hung in the air. You could feel it. This chapter was over. Officer Kline turned back to the family. His voice had softened now, a touch of warmth beneath his badge. "You handled it with honor," he said. He paused as if to let the words settle. "That matters more than you know." Derek didn't reply. He didn't need to. His eyes followed the Mallorys until they were gone, swallowed by a justice system they thought would protect them. Instead, it revealed them, exposed them, and now the truth was out for the world to see. The station slowly returned to rhythm. The rush of the day faded into steady footsteps, quiet voices, and clicking keyboards. Reports were filed, paperwork prepared. Officer Kline promised Derek that the official documents clearing them of all charges would be issued soon, and that the school would be notified too. Derek nodded. That next battle he was ready for. Jada and Janelle sat close. They were tired, sure but unshaken. Their shoulders remained square, their eyes focused. The hours of questioning and waiting hadn't dimmed their spirit. They knew the truth mattered. They had lived it. And now, they were ready to leave the station behind. As the three of them stood to go, the low evening light poured through the station windows. It cast a soft glow on them, father and daughters, standing together like they always had. Not as people someone tried to silence, but as voices that refused to be ignored. They didn't just survive someone else's story. They reclaimed it. And they wrote the ending themselves. They had fought. They had endured. They had won. Back at Rosewood Hills Academy, the morning sun spread across the courtyard, cutting through the last of the night. The school looked the same, brick buildings, trimmed hedges, but something about the light felt new, brighter, as if the whole place had taken a deep breath after holding it for far too long. This was the same courtyard where cruel jokes once echoed, the same place where stares had burned and whispers had followed them like shadows. But now something had shifted. The tension wasn't gone, not completely, but it had changed shape. The air buzzed with something different. Awareness, change, a new weight in every glance, in every quiet conversation. Not fear, just understanding. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. Not gossip, not rumor. Facts. Real, undeniable truth. The story of what happened, of the fight, the arrests, the evidence, moved through the halls like wildfire. People weren't pretending not to know anymore. They knew. Students who used to laugh along with Ryan and his crew now stood in quiet clusters. They talked in hushed voices. They watched the gates, eyes flicking to the school entrance because they knew who was coming. The twins were returning, and this time they wouldn't be walking in as targets. They were walking in as proof. Proof that silence doesn't always mean surrender. That staying calm isn't the same as backing down. And that when truth stands tall, when a family stands together, it's not just their story that changes. It's the world around them that starts to shift too. Teachers who had once turned a blind eye, who had looked away when it mattered most, now moved with a quiet stiffness. The kind that only comes when guilt sets in. Their silence had protected no one. And now, the weight of their inaction sat, heavy on their shoulders. Inside the administrative office, Headmaster Harrington stood behind his desk, his posture rigid, his expression tight. In his hands were the official police reports. There was no room left to hide. No more doubt to cling to. He scanned the page again, his eyes passing over the names tied to undeniable proof. Ryan Mallory, Zach Carver, Brent Larson, and next to each, one simple, powerful word: expelled, effective immediately. Across from section him sat Derek Rivers, calm, focused, just as steady as he had been in the police station. His eyes didn't flinch. His presence, grounded and strong, made it clear. He wasn't here for apologies. He was here for accountability. Beside him, Jada and Janelle sat poised, their uniforms sharp, their faces still. They had walked through fire and come out whole. And now they were ready to walk back into the very halls that had once tried to shrink them. The board met early this morning. Harrington began, his voice tight, like a man forcing himself to swallow his pride. Given the findings of the investigation and the overwhelming evidence of what your daughters endured, the suspensions have been lifted, effective immediately. Jada and Janelle are welcome to return to their classes, starting today. He paused, clearing his throat as his fingers clenched the edges of the papers, still unable to fully meet their eyes. Furthermore, he added, the students responsible have been permanently expelled. A long silence followed. Not awkward, not empty, but full. Heavy with meaning. It was a silence that let the truth sink in. When Derek finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, not angry, just firm, just true. It's the decision that should have been made from the beginning. He said it wasn't a dig. It wasn't even a challenge. It was a fact. One Harrington couldn't deny. His lips thinned. Something flickered behind his eyes. Maybe it was regret, maybe shame, maybe both. He gave a small nod, barely more than a twitch, but it was there. We failed your family, he said quietly. His voice had lost its polish. It sounded rough, real. We failed in our duty to protect all our students. That changes today. Jada met his gaze directly, her voice as strong as it had been every time someone had tried to make her feel small. Make sure it does, she said, no heat in her tone, just clarity. Beside her, Janelle added her voice just as sure. And not just for us, she said. For every student who doesn't fit your picture of what's normal. That landed. Harrington didn't speak, couldn't. For a moment, it looked like the full weight of their words had finally settled in. His hand trembled slightly as he set the papers down, the ones that had spelled out both the damage done and the steps taken to begin making it right. As the three of them rose from their seats, Derek placed a hand on each of his daughter's shoulders. A soft, silent show of pride. No words were needed. The moment spoke for itself. It wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what they made sure would never happen again. Together, they stepped out of the office and into the main hallway. Their footsteps echoed through the long corridor. Once, a place that felt cold and full of stairs. Now simply a hallway. A path cleared not by luck, but by the courage it took to walk through fire and keep moving forward. Students turned to look as they passed. Some watched with open curiosity, others with quiet respect. A few looked away, their expressions heavy with guilt from the roles they'd played, through words, actions, or silence. But no one said anything. No one dared to sneer or mock. The truth had spoken too loudly. There were no more shadows to hide in. Jada and Janelle walked side by side, heads high, shoulders back. They weren't just students returning after a storm. They were a reminder that standing tall, even when everything tries to push you down, can break even the strongest walls, built by hate. Outside, the morning breeze met them, cool and crisp, brushing across their faces like a quiet kind of welcome. Their father stepped beside them, steady as always, and together the three of them crossed the courtyard. Not rushed, not nervous, but calm, confident. Every step forward was earned. Then Derek's voice broke the silence. Low, firm, honest. The storm is over, he said. Not like a hope, but like a fact. Like a man stating something he knew in his bones. "No," Jada replied, eyes forward, her voice strong and steady. "We ended it." Janelle let out the smallest smile. Fierce, quiet, proud. "And we'll end it again," she added. "If we have to." Together they stepped back into the school, not as shadows, not as targets, but as truth-tellers, as survivors, as family. The doors closed behind them and the light ahead was theirs to walk toward. The next few days brought calm. Not because the world had forgotten, but because it had shifted. The chaos, the cruelty, the noise. It had all gone quiet, like a storm. Finally run dry. But Jada and Janelle never forgot. They didn't carry the memory like a burden. They carried it like armor, stitched with fire and strength, sharpened by every fight they had faced. Rosewood Hills felt different now. Not perfect, but changed. Like the air had learned how to breathe better, lighter, cleaner. The silence in the hallways didn't sting anymore. It didn't feel like fear or judgment. It felt like respect. Teachers no longer avoided their gaze, no longer rushed past or called names without looking up. Now, when they spoke to the girls, they looked them in the eye, and you could hear the difference in their voices. Firmer, kinder, more human. Even the students changed. The ones who used to laugh or whisper or simply turn away now gave small nods in the halls. Not grand gestures, not fake apologies. Just small moments that felt real. In the courtyard, where once the weight of judgment clung to every step, Jada and Janelle walked freely. Their pace easy, their posture relaxed, no tension in their shoulders. No eyes burning into their backs. At lunch, they sat beneath the old oak tree. The same spot where laughter once felt cruel now felt soft. The sun spilled through the branches, warm on their faces as they talked. Not about justice or fights or change, but about little things. Homework, favorite songs. What they wanted to do this weekend, because that's what freedom looks like sometimes. It's not always a headline. Sometimes it's a quiet breath on a school bench. Sometimes it's knowing you don't have to look over your shoulder. Sometimes it's just peace. They didn't need anyone to make a speech. They didn't need a trophy or a banner or a round of applause. They had something stronger, something that would last. Truth, strength, each other. And as they laughed beneath the branches of the tree, the light around them felt different too. Like it had been waiting for them all along. They hadn't just made it through the storm. They had rewritten what it meant to stand in the rain and not be washed away. Their voices were lighter now, free in a way that only comes when you stop holding your breath. When you no longer have to watch every word, every glance, every step. No, it wasn't perfect, but they had never been chasing perfection. What they had now was something better. Peace, not the kind that's given, but the kind that's earned. Earned through every long day, every hard moment, every time they stood up when it would have been easier to shrink. They knew deep down that what they had faced hadn't just set them free. It had shaken something loose in the school itself. Something quiet, but lasting. Like the walls had finally learned to listen. Like the ground had learned not to look away. Their father's words still lived with them, not as distant memories, but as truths that breathed with them. Stand your ground, he had told them over and over. And they had. Not just for themselves, but for everyone who would come after them. For the quiet kids, the different kids. The ones who didn't always get seen until someone made sure they were. As the sun began to lower in the sky, stretching long shadows across the grass, the twins sat side by side. Their laughter came easily now, real, full, soft around the edges. Their eyes bright with the simple joy of a normal afternoon. Not a moment stolen, a moment claimed. They hadn't just survived Rosewood Hills Academy, they had reclaimed it. And as they looked out over the courtyard, the same place that had once tried to silence them, they no longer saw fear. They saw space, room to grow, room to breathe. Room they had carved out with their own courage and held with their own hands. They had already won, and they'd keep winning. Not in big dramatic ways, but in the quiet ones. In every step they took, Freely, in every word spoken without fear, in the bond they'd built and kept strong, every single day forward was theirs.